What happens when Hollywood legend Sylvester Stallone sits down expecting a respectful conversation about his legendary career, only to find himself blindsided by one of the most disrespectful and confrontational hosts on daytime television? You won't believe what unfolds when Joy Behar decides to ambush the Rocky icon with political accusations and personal attacks that leave the entire studio in stunned silence. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a complete meltdown that exposes the ugly truth about how certain hosts treat their guests when the cameras are rolling. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when one of America's most beloved action stars gets pushed to an absolute breaking point on live television. The tension was palpable from the moment Sylvester Stallone walked onto the View set last night. What was supposed to be a promotional appearance for his latest project quickly devolved into one of the most uncomfortable and explosive confrontations in the show's history. The 77-year-old acting legend, known for his iconic roles as Rocky Balboa and John Rambo, found himself under immediate attack from Joy Behar, who seemed determined to turn the interview into a political battlefield rather than a celebration of his remarkable career. It all started innocently enough. The other co-hosts were clearly excited to have Stallone on the show, with Whoopi Goldberg opening by praising his decades of contribution to cinema. Sarah Haynes asked about his upcoming projects, and for the first few minutes, the conversation flowed naturally as Stallone discussed his passion for storytelling and his gratitude to his fans. The audience was clearly thrilled to see the Philadelphia native, and his charm and humility were on full display. But then Joy Behar struck. "Sylvester, you've played these tough guy characters your whole career," Behar interrupted, her voice dripping with condescension. "But in real life, you've supported some pretty questionable political figures. How do you reconcile playing these American heroes when you've endorsed candidates who many people consider to be threats to democracy?" The shift in the room was immediate and uncomfortable. Stallone's smile faded as he processed what had just happened. The other hosts exchanged glances, clearly not expecting this ambush. The audience fell silent, sensing that something had gone terribly wrong. "Joy, I came here to talk about my work," Stallone replied, his voice measured but clearly strained. "I've always tried to keep my personal political beliefs separate from my professional appearances. I think that's what's respectful to the audience." But Behar wasn't finished. In fact, she was just getting started. "Oh, come on," she scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "You can't hide behind that anymore. You've made your political views very public. You've posed for pictures with controversial figures. Don't you think your fans deserve to know why you support people who attack our democratic institutions?" The accusatory tone was unmistakable, and Stallone's jaw visibly tightened. This wasn't a question. It was an interrogation. The other co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats, with Sunny Hostin attempting to redirect the conversation, but Behar steamrolled right over her. "I'm not here to be lectured about politics," Stallone said, his famous raspy voice growing harder. "I'm here as an actor, as an entertainer. I've spent 50 years trying to inspire people through my characters, and I think that speaks for itself. But inspiration means nothing if you're supporting the wrong people in real life," Behar shot back, her voice getting louder and more aggressive. "You want to play these patriotic heroes on screen, but then you cozy up to politicians who tried to overturn an election. How is that patriotic?" The studio audience began to murmur, clearly uncomfortable with the hostility being directed at their beloved guest. Whoopi Goldberg tried to intervene, suggesting they move on to discussing Stallone's charitable work, but Behar was relentless. "No, I think this is important," she declared, cutting off her co-host. "People need to understand that just because someone plays a hero doesn't mean they are one. Actions have consequences, Sylvester." That's when something snapped in the Rocky star. His face flushed red, and for the first time in the interview, he leaned forward in his chair, his eyes blazing with anger. "You want to talk about actions having consequences?" Stallone's voice boomed across the studio. "Let's talk about the consequences of ambushing a guest who came here in good faith. Let's talk about the consequences of turning what should be a respectful conversation into a political hit job." The tension in the room was now electric. Camera operators could be seen adjusting their shots, sensing they were capturing something explosive. The other co-hosts looked mortified, but Behar seemed energized by the confrontation. "Oh, please, you're being dramatic," she dismissed with a wave of her hand. "I'm just asking legitimate questions that your fans want answered. If you can't handle basic questions about your public statements and photo opportunities, maybe you shouldn't be making them." "Basic questions?" Stallone's voice rose another octave. "You've been attacking me from the moment I sat down. This isn't journalism, Joy. This is a setup. You invited me here under false pretenses just so you could grandstand for your audience." The audience was now visibly uncomfortable, with some people shaking their heads and others looking toward the exits. This wasn't the feel-good celebrity interview they had come to see. This was a public execution. But Behar wasn't backing down. If anything, she seemed to be enjoying herself. "I invited you here because I think people deserve to know who they're supporting when they buy movie tickets," she said with a smirk. "If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe you should examine why." That was the final straw. Stallone stood up abruptly, his chair rolling backward from the force. The studio fell completely silent as the 77-year-old legend towered over the talk show hosts, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You know what, Joy?" he said, his voice now deadly quiet. "In all my years in this business, I've encountered some real pieces of work. But you take the cake. You invite someone onto your show just to humiliate them for your own entertainment. That's not hosting, that's bullying." The other host sat frozen, clearly mortified by what was unfolding. Whoopi Goldberg attempted to speak, but Stallone held up his hand. "No, Whoopi, I respect you, but I'm done here," he said. "I came here to talk about my work, to connect with fans, to have a decent conversation. Instead, I get ambushed by someone who's more interested in scoring political points than showing basic human decency." Behar, for the first time, seemed to realize she had gone too far. Her smirk faded as she watched one of Hollywood's biggest stars prepare to walk out on her show. "Sylvester, sit down," she said, trying to regain control. "We can move on to something else." "No," Stallone said firmly, already reaching for his microphone to remove it. "We can't just move on. You can't attack someone's character and integrity for 10 minutes and then act like it's no big deal. That's not how respect works." He began unhooking his microphone, his movements deliberate and final. The studio audience watched in stunned silence as the man who had inspired millions as Rocky Balboa prepared to make his exit. "I've been in this business for 5 decades, Stallone continued, his voice carrying across the silent studio. "I've been interviewed by thousands of people. Most of them, even when they disagreed with me, treated me with basic human dignity. You couldn't even manage that." Behar made one last desperate attempt to salvage the situation. "Sylvester, you're overreacting. I was just doing my job." Stallone paused in his preparations to leave and looked directly at her. His eyes filled with disappointment rather than anger. "Your job is to entertain and inform your audience, not to humiliate your guests," he said. "But I guess we have different definitions of professionalism." With that, he dropped his microphone on the chair and began walking toward the exit. The cameras followed him as he moved with the same determined stride that had carried Rocky up those Philadelphia Museum steps decades earlier. "Thank you to the other ladies for having me," he called out over his shoulder, not even bothering to look back at Behar. "And thank you to the audience for your support over all these years. You deserve better than this kind of television." The studio door closed behind him with a definitive click, leaving the remaining hosts sitting in stunned silence. The audience began to applaud, not for the show, but clearly for Stallone's dignified exit. Behar sat frozen in her chair, finally understanding that her aggressive tactics had backfired spectacularly. In those final moments, as the applause grew louder and the other hosts scrambled to regain their composure, it became crystal clear who the real hero was in this confrontation. And it wasn't the person behind the desk who had started the fight.